Welcome back from the break, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the session on post-COVID recovery and women's leadership. My name is Koto Reeves, and I have spent the last 15 years working for gender equality across more than 43 countries globally. I'm honored to be a part of this session this morning. As a World Fellow here at Yale, it has been increasingly clear that collective response and collective responsibility for what happens to the world and the world's people is critical at this time. So I would like to start by telling you a bit about the program. The Maurice R. Greenberg World Fellows program started in 2002. It is a 4-month full-time residential program based out of Yale Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. To date, there are more than 400 fellows, alumni across the world who are doing work for the good society. The next panel is the Women Excelling in African Business. This panel will be moderated by Jonathan Berman. He is the managing partner of AIP Investors, a private partnership that invests in early stage technology companies focused on emerging markets. For the panelists, we have 3 exceptional women who are working across the world to ensure that people have access to not only information that supports their businesses, but also life-saving information in terms of the current context we find ourselves in. So first on the panel is Uche Ogboy. Uche is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Lorry Systems Corporation, an ex-logistics startup in one of the largest and fastest growing startups on the continent, which was recently nominated as a 2020 Tech Pioneer by the World Economic Forum. Next on the panel is Bilha Dirangu. She's the CEO of the African Leadership Academy. Bilha started this position in 2021 as the first non-founder CEO in the Academy's history. Before joining the African Leadership Academy, Bilha was the CEO of Africa's Talking, based in Nairobi, Kenya. She has been recognized as an Endeavor entrepreneur. Next on the panel is Rebecca Inonchong. She's the CEO of Appstec. Rebecca is founder and chief executive of Apptec, which is a leading global provider of enterprise application solutions. She was named as a global leader for tomorrow by the World Economic Forum of Davos, Switzerland. As a reminder, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A function, and I'll now hand you over to Jonathan, who's the moderator for this panel. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, you're on mute.
Of course I am. Thank you, Corito. And thank you to our panelists. Rebecca and Nanchong may be having some connectivity problems, but we do have Uche and Bilha with us. And welcome to everyone participating. As an alum, I'm so proud to see Yale take leadership on this important topic and on engaging with business and business schools throughout Africa. It does this for good to see it. Earlier today, our conference chair mentioned some of the challenges facing women in business leadership in Africa. And those challenges are real, and we'll be discussing them, but so are the opportunities. Just 2 days ago, in fact, Africa.com and Bloomberg released a study looking at female business leadership in Africa. And their focus was exclusively public companies in Africa with over $150 million in market value that are led by women CEOs. So public companies over $150 million of value in Africa led by women. There are 1,400 such women leaders, which struck me as an extraordinary figure. on top of the high proportion of African women relative to other regions in leadership that Grant Thornton has produced a study on. So today we're joined by a more intimate set of women leaders in African business. You've heard the bios for Bilha, Rebecca, and Uche. They all lead or have led successful digital startups on the continent. And they were each educated at a premier institution in the US, or in Uche's case, in the UK. And given our student audience, I'd like to start there. I wonder if each of you could say hello and then speak a bit about that time in your lives and reflect on how or why it led you to business leadership in Africa. Uche, I wonder if you might kick us off.
Hi, is this good? Can you hear me?
We can.
Cool. Thank you everyone for having me here. Glad to be here. Always enjoy having these conversations. So yes, I did go to university in the UK and I started up my career there. I think I worked there for only about 2 years. But then even in that time, I realized, I used to come back every so often for holidays to see family and things like that. And I realized what significant gaps there were here across whether it's different industries or different levels of sort of management and leadership, and the clear need for professionals with local context on the continent. And for me, the biggest sort of driver of moving back here was the amount of impact that I would make coming back here. And so, in a lot of developed markets, it's really about that last 1% of efficiency, whereas here, you're literally like starting from scratch. And so the amount of, or the value or the amount of impact that will be made from that 1% that you do is more significant here. And so those are some of the reasons that drove me to return back to the continent.
Bilha?
Sure, thanks, Jonathan. I think very much similar to Uche's experience. Went to school in the US and had a chance to come back a couple of summers and winter breaks. And that one, I think that was really helpful because it kept me connected to the continent. And yeah, so it was the idea of, I'd come back home and you do, for example, one of the summers I came back home and we spent the summer with some MIT students teaching programming. And it was a fairly basic programming class, but the amount of confidence that I saw the class inspire, just for those 3 months, and for people, for the kids to kind of see, and this were both high school kids and some, pre-university students, just seeing the amount of confidence that it inspired in them and, wanting to dream bigger, and just us spending 3 months with them was enough for them to say, this was an amazing program. I want to, apply for global programs, etc. Definitely reinforced this idea that Uche was talking about the need or just the impact that your work can have on the continent. It's the same mind, same effort, but just has such a multiplier effect when you think about it, compared to if I was working, in some, in a Wall Street firm or, in Silicon Valley, etc. And don't get me wrong, those are amazing roles. And I think you learn a lot from those kinds of roles. But there's something to be said about being on the continent and solving problems. The next thing, and I think I'll say is, when I was coming back, I think it was around that time when there's this whole Africa Rising movement, etc. That sort of quieted down in a bit. But then I think it was just that ability to take advantage of the fact that Africa was opening up and people were starting to, appreciate skill sets from, global skill sets. We're starting to see capital starting to flow into the continent, and you could actually start businesses. You could start tech companies then, which again, years before wasn't possible. So I think the fact that it was a time when the continent was starting to open up and becoming a lot more global, connected to the global marketplace made it a lot easier to come back and just try out things.
Thanks, Bilha. I see that Rebecca has come online and driven into sufficient connectivity. Rebecca, perfect timing. So the question I asked, we introduced you already in absentia, but the question that I asked was just to tell us a little, start with your time in university in DC, I think it was, and then just describe the journey of that into your leadership in African business, right? How did that come to happen?
So sorry about this. I was looking for a connection, and I'm in Africa, and I found a connection in a car somewhere. So I just wanted to explain that. So apologies for being late. So I did start in a Catholic university in the US, and I really started working while I was in school. I studied economics. I thought what I wanted was a career, you know, in a development, you know, maybe the World Bank or one of those organizations to, and so I studied international political economy at Catholic University. And while I was working, while I was studying, I was working and I was doing bookkeeping and accounting for small businesses. And this is a long time ago. I'm not going to how long. Eventually those businesses started to want to, you know, install an accounting program. And so I started installing their accounting program and started using their accounting program to do their bookkeeping on the side. Started doing taxes for people, you know, using software. And this is all, you know, very, very early on. I was actually one of the first people approved by the IRS for electronic filing. You know, we still had modems, and we had to connect through modems to the IRS. So that's really how I started in tech. Is, you know, is just working and trying to make money while I was in school, and you know, eventually took jobs mostly in finance, and then financial systems. Started working as a financial systems consultant, and then went to work, I think, for Oracle for a couple of years, doing financial systems for Oracle, and then set up my company, which is called Appstec, and that it's been 22 years.
Thanks. So I think, no, you're good. So I think, listen, I think the journey each of you took is going to be particular. I wanted you each to have a chance to speak to that question because I think it's relevant to particularly the students that we have joining us in amongst the participants. I may bounce around a little bit on the questions I've shared with you. Not everyone has to answer every question, and as I encourage you, if you have questions for another, please ask them. But one thing I wanted to ask is that though your start is familiar, will be familiar to that audience, I think where you are now will not be. So I'm curious to hear you qualify sort of maybe the difference of context for an African, for a woman business leader in Africa as opposed to elsewhere. And that might just be the difference between business leadership in Africa versus elsewhere. But if it's particular, if anything particular around gender, right, around how it is for a woman in those two locations, that would be, I think, interesting context for people who don't experience it. And please, anybody who cares to answer, I'm happy to listen.
Okay.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. I was last, so go ahead.
No, I think you make an interesting point, Jonathan, around the fact that definitely being a business leader in Africa is quite different from being a business leader anywhere else, and it's partly just driven by the environment and just it's getting easier, but without having to speak to it a lot, we all know the different things that people will talk about difficulties in doing business in Africa, whether it's policy, environments, to lack of funding, to just smaller markets, and markets that are not as rich as it were with disposable income as you'd find in other markets. So those challenges exist, and I believe that Africa, anyone trying to do business in Africa definitely has to taking that, and it's a lot different. It's it's challenges that you kind of have to take in and take into account, and it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, as it were. Then of course now when you do port over to being a female leader, there are particularly interesting challenges, and I think this also depends on in different countries. And part of it is just the fact that you just don't have as many leaders as well, as you don't see as many women leaders, and it's not because they cannot do the job, but there's something to be said for feeling, it can get lonely in a sense, because you sort of look around and you look at for example, I spent a lot of time in the tech world before my current role, and you really could, there weren't that many women tech founders, and so who do you reach out to and sort of have conversations with and have a shared understanding or shared lived experience, as it were, what it means to be a woman in a technical world. Of course, it'll be the tales you'll hear about going to places and people not necessarily taking you as seriously because you're a woman. But with time, you sort of learn to prove yourself, and the more you're able to, the more it becomes about your work. People do forget that you are a woman, and it becomes about this, business leader. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep at the back of the mind. But what I do tell young women is to focus on their work, and the more you keep building great companies, or you keep building whatever role you have, the better you do it, the more eventually it does become about the work, and you're then known as a business leader rather than as a woman business leader. And I think moving from that, I think it's important that we get to the place where we stop this, we don't have this distinction where it says, oh, she's a great female leader, why, rather than just saying she's a great leader. But so I think it's something to keep at the back of the mind, but I think if you focus on the work, it does help sort of smoothen it up, but I don't think it fully goes away.
So go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. So I started my business in the US and then moved to Cameroon. And so I experienced both. And so in the US, it was already super difficult because there were no women tech founders, very few. And then you added the minority Black woman, and then you add the foreign Black woman, and it was very difficult. As a matter of fact, nobody believed that it was my company. And I have a video out, it's a TEDx talk where I talk a little bit about, how I dealt with this when I started, where I really just hid, like I didn't really project or say that I was the person running the company. In Africa, it's that multiplied, right? I got to the point where one of my employees, who was a doing this, hello? Okay, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We couldn't for a few minutes, but we can now.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. So as I said, so I had this white male that worked for me, and I realized, and we all realized, that whenever he said something, even to a customer, it would go, like they wouldn't question it. Like 20 other people could say the exact same thing on a client project in Africa, and they would question it and question it and question it. And so we just made him a virtual boss. So so whenever we have like till today, actually, sometimes, so whenever we have like a complicated customer, he's the one that actually sends the email, and they shut up. And it's really crazy to have to do that in 2021. But, sometimes there's some battles I just don't feel like having. And, so you really start finding very practical ways of moving forward. For years and years, I didn't have a title on my business card because I could be an engineer, and I could be, because people don't want you to be the CEO, because you don't look like you're the competent, you're going to deliver. And so they reject that psychologically so often that I just not a battle that I want to have. But, what you said earlier, Uche, is about the fact that after a while, people understand who you are and accept you as a woman leader, and not just a woman leader. I think that really takes a lot of time, and I don't think we get there 100%. And that's okay. I think that we can't have the burden of that. We can't carry the burden of that. We just have to move on and do our work.
You know,
I
for those who
think
know, I'm
you
sorry.
were
I
going to
was
say
just gonna,
something, Jonathan?
yeah, I was just going to say, Uche, I'm sorry. You know, for those who know the African technology community, Rebecca Anantong is extremely well known and highly respected as a leader. It's kind of unimaginable to me to imagine you hiding behind another person in leadership, but it just speaks to the power of the obstructions in the path. Uche, please, I'm interested in your thoughts. It occurs to me that both you and Bilha took over your current positions from men, from founder male CEOs. And I'm just curious if you have, as you're speaking, if you have any reflections on that experience. But feel free to say what you were going to say as well.
No, I was just going to add to what both of them said. And to the specific point that Rebecca made, that sometimes there are just so many battles. They're just some, sometimes they say pick your battles. And they're just some that as much as it pains you, you're just like, not today. I just need to get it done. There's so many times where I've been in a meeting, especially in the corporate world, actually, in the tech startup world is much better. But my previous life, I was an investment banker for almost 10 years. And I remember going into meetings and people saying, not believing that it was me they were meeting with, so all of this. And I remember actually even starting this job, I remember someone saying, oh, it's because you're a woman, I want to talk to a man. I mean, my sector specifically is notorious. But having said all of that, I think we've made, there's been great progress over the last few years. And what is great is that for the entire continent and for everybody to see female presidents, to see Okonjo-Iweala as the head of World Trade Organization, to see 5 bank CEOs in Nigeria. I mean, 5 out of 20 plus is not great, but compared to 0 is something. To see all of these women starting to achieving publicly displayed as leaders and successful leaders at that, people are it's really starting to change the way that people are thinking. So great, better times ahead, I hope. And then to your question, taking over from a male CEO, it's only been 1 quarter, so still early. I think for me specifically, so I'll talk about internally and externally. I mean, I haven't actually really thought about it, but internally for me, I mean, pre this role, I was COO and I was very active. So I was doing a lot of the internal things anyway. So I was leading all of the internal workflows and all of that, and, making great achievements with that. So I remember starting and having to tell a few people, do not speak to me like that, right? But you really have to nip it in the bud sometimes. And sometimes it's just too much. You just say, look, I just need to get it done. But the best thing is always nip it in the bud. And the moment you do that, you essentially set the expectations of how you want to operate or interact with certain people. And as Bill has said, once you start to deliver, then nobody questions you, and and it's great. So the best thing to do is really focus on your work. It's challenging, and you will hit all of these really frustrating roadblocks, but just continue to push. So internally, it's been fine. Externally, I haven't yet noticed anything, but the jury's still out, still quite early, so we'll see.
Bilha, do you mind if I ask you about that question, the transition from Sam's leadership to yours?
Sure. I think, yeah, when I think about my journey at Africa Stalking, so I had been there as the COO for a couple of years, and so like Uche was very familiar with the ins and outs of the business. So nuts and bolts, had done literally everything just to get the business up and running and grown most of the team. So there wasn't much in terms of understanding the business and familiarity, and the team knew me, and sort of I think over the years I'd sort of garnered the respect of the team. What was interesting was sort of that shift, because I think this is something that a lot of people I find, especially women, struggle with, where I was very comfortable being in the background, and especially as a COO role is a very good back office, get everything done, but no one knows about you, and you're not necessarily the public face of anything. And having to sort of position myself and become the face of the company, and getting to realize, and also beginning to communicate to the team and to myself actually, that I was a leader and decisions ended with me. And so I remember those first few days, I would still find myself in a way sort of going back to, I wonder how Sam would do this, or even the team, because the team members sort of saying, oh yeah, let's check with Sam, let's see what he would say, and I had to come back and tell myself, no, you are the CEO, and you need to make the final decisions, and people need to sort of see that, and see you as a final decision maker, as opposed to seeing you as someone else to check up with before we we go back to the real leader. And so I think that's one thing that's important to take on. And so anyone that's sort of doing a transition, especially if it's a man, a male leader sort of, giving over to a female leader, I think the ability to support that person and constantly redirecting people and saying, this is a new leader and you need to give her the support she requires. I think it's definitely quite helpful. But also as a female leader taking up something like that, it is important to own your space and not necessarily shrink back and say, oh, because I think we do that a lot as female leaders, as it were. But I think with time, gaining that confidence and being okay to make my own decisions was quite important. The other thing that was important was the need to sort of create my own voice. I feel like a lot of times taking over from, especially a founder leader and a strong leader, one could easily find themselves trying to morph to become a continuation of that leader. And while there might be some things to pick up from an outgoing leader that are important and are important to keep going, it's important to remember that you are the new boss, and it's important that the organization gets to feel your voice and gets to feel who you are and your authentic self and what you bring to the table. And sometimes I feel like, especially for women leaders, but I guess it's a new leader taking over from someone else, it's very easy to sort of slip back into the shadows of the old leader and sort of try to do things the way they used to do them, as opposed to being confident to bring your own way. And this is my new way of doing things, and let's try it out. If it fails, it's okay, because you are the leader, and that's part of the journey. So I think just encouraging people to own the seat and own the table, as it were, and not be afraid to make mistakes because you're sort of really looking at what the old person has done, or trying to be copy what the old person did. Hope that makes sense.
It does, thanks. And it's interesting contrast with Rebecca's journey of starting AppsTech and the engagement with males, even who were working for her at that time. So Uche mentioned the presence of the rise of leaders in government and in business who are female, and that's had, or she hopes it will have, a changing, a favorable effect on perceptions. I wanted to ask a little more about perceptions of women business leaders. How are we're in Africa, or specifically in the region where you work, how are women leaders, or specifically women business leaders, portrayed, and how are they understood? Does this exist in the popular culture? Do you see them on business news or in the business press? And is it characterized in any way that's distinctive from their male peers?
I can try to answer for Cameroon, for the Central African region. There are a number of women business leaders, but definitely not treated or respected in the same way as the male peers. And I look, for instance, at the main business association, Business Leaders Association, where there are very few women in leadership positions. And you'll see that a man that is running a business that's smaller than the women's businesses are really given a lot more consideration than the women. It's almost a struggle because people don't think, they still haven't pictured us as potential just equal to men. And it's a huge debate. It's almost like feminism is a bad word, and yeah, so but it's changing. I've seen it change over the last 20 years. You know, where when I started, it was impossible. I mean, I would get asked questions like, but who is really behind the company? Like, who is really behind, you know, who is really behind you, and who are you? You know, it's almost like I'm standing in for maybe a politician that stole money or something like that. I don't know, but you know, it was very like they would not imagine that it was my business. I think it's starting to change, especially with the next generation. So I love the fact that these young women are running companies, huge, big tech companies on the continent that have a great future. And so that young women, and I believe that symbol is so important, so that young girls and young boys can see, can picture tech success, or I'm sorry, business success, as being not white male or not male at all. And I think it's so important in the work that I've done with the AfriLabs organization. AfriLabs is a network of technology hubs across the African continent, and I'm the board chair. You know, we have lots of women that are on the board of the organization, elected board members. We have our executive team is mostly made up of women. And I think that it's really important because, you know, this is an organization that's supporting over 1 million entrepreneurs over the African, on the African continent through all the tech hubs, the 300 tech hubs that are members. And I think that seeing women at the head of these organizations is symbolically very, very important. And I think so the more we see women in positions of authority, in positions of power, and you know, the more we will start to, it becomes, it normalizes it. And that's what I think, that's where we need to get, is that, you know, people like me are no longer an exception. We're just another, you know, we're just women in women leaders. And yeah, so I really hope that that's where we get, but that we're not there yet.
So to that end, I'm curious if there were women or are women leaders in African business who aren't on our panel, but who you might who you looked up to then or now as role models, or just someone who's inspiring to you. And you know, you can feel free to name more than one if you'd like, but people give some context so that those who don't know these people can understand.
I think there's lots of different women that one could look to. But I'm just thinking about in Kenya, she might not necessarily be known as much to the panel, but this lady called Miss Mary Okello, and she is a pioneer school founder. So she started this group of schools called Makini, and which has since been taken over by a different group. But why I find her story really inspiring, and I think really resonates to what Rebecca was saying, was just the confidence and the guts, I guess, that it took for her to start a business at a time when it wasn't well known that one could even start private schools, leave alone being a woman, and what it took for her to actually get that started. But I think for me, it speaks to the courage and the confidence, the courage and the boldness that we still need to have, because the more women like us or the people in the audience take those steps and say, you know what, I'm going to go into this field where it's quote unquote male dominated and you don't see as many women leaders, and actually just take it up and work, and go out and do the business and fight whatever battles you need to fight. What it does, and I think what it will do, is the more you can have examples of women doing these great things, then more and more young girls can grow up seeing that movie or seeing that picture of a female leader. And because what we're trying to do, at least what we're hoping to get to, is a place where it's not odd to see a woman leader in a boardroom or to see a woman leader in some political power or in business or whatever it is. We shouldn't be talking about female tech founders. We should just be talking about tech founders. But it's going to take a while till we get there. But I reckon that ability to have someone or seeing people doing these things and normalizing it, hopefully just makes it a lot easier for girls to visualize themselves as leaders. And I think that's what some of these pioneer women have done, and I appreciate them for that. And I hope we can do the same things to the next generation.
Just to add to what Bill has said, can everyone hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My network is a bit choppy. There's several sort of tech space. Somebody that I really admire is Omobola Johnson. She is currently a partner at a venture capital firm called TLCom. For me, what inspires me about her is that she is a super smart woman that has just focused on hard work and just executing and displaying her intelligence. She is on, I think, north of 8 boards, 3+ of which are some of the biggest companies on the continent. Chairman of Guinness, which is the Diageo brand in Nigeria, MTN, and has just has a phenomenal background. And so she, for me, is an example of how, your intelligence and just your hard work and persistence and focus, she is hyper-focused on her goals. It can take you to just where you want to go, despite all of the challenges and all of the, previously male-dominated sort of positions that she's had. And so to add to what Bilha is saying, I think that it's clear that, despite all of the challenges, once you can focus and commit to developing yourself and being excellent at whatever you do, there is a high chance of you getting it, especially just given how the trajectory of what's happening everywhere now.
Rebecca?
Gosh, Dr. Johnson is such a great example of women that are real pioneers that we can really look up to. And TLCom organizes a women in women tech founders or women in tech summit every year. And so it's one way that they're giving back and supporting the next generation of leaders. There are so many, but so many are even younger than I am and have started after I did, that I find to be inspiring. Anna Ekeledo, who's our executive director at Afrolabs, she inspires me every day. Fadila Chumba, who's the Secretary General of ABAN, the African Business Angels Network, inspires me every day. I'm so blessed to know so many young women doing so many great things that it takes a lot of pressure off of me, because it was getting tiring to be you know, the tech founder, the African woman tech founder for so many years. So it's really exciting to see, you know, even this panel. I mean, I love and respect you guys so much and what you've done. And I know how difficult it is. So yeah, for me, it's really more the new generation of young leaders, of women that have, you know, made so many strides that help us, even though we might be of another generation.
Thanks. I want to mix in questions that are now coming in from our participants. So with the session host's permission, I'll just intermingle their questions and some outstanding ones I had for the balance of our time together. So one asks, what psychological changes had to happen within yourself as you grew into your leadership role? Did you notice any specific self-limitations or unhelpful thought patterns? And Bill, you spoke a bit to this before, but please, any of you.
I think I'll say, and I mean, hopefully I'm not repeating myself here. For me, it was the comfort level I had being in the background, especially, as I said, being a COO. And before then I was a consultant, where again, it's a kind of thing where you do a lot of back-end analysis and present, partner presents. You never really get to be at the forefront of presenting your ideas and being confident about, the ideas that you bring up. And so, because you always kind of leave it to someone else to do it. And so I had to get comfortable with getting to, being at the forefront and being the face of my ideas and speaking out, etc., rather than just sort of telling someone else is what I think and letting them run with it. So I think that's one thing. The second thing was you do learn, and I guess as women, you sort of have this. It's important that we're collaborative, and I think it's an important aspect of being a leader. But it's finding that balance between what I'd call firmness versus collaborativeness. So it's how do you bring people along, but at the same time being able to just be very firm and say, this is the direction we're going, and this is, we've taken in all the different considerations, but here's the direction, and let's actually make sure, everyone is sort of following suit. Again, needing to kind of, bring myself to that place where you combine this ability to sort of be consultative and collaborative, but at the same time, just having just being firm, and wasn't something that was natural. So it's just something that I had sort of had to grow into.
I think Bill and I are going to be best friends. She said, like, literally, it's so funny because when she answered the other question, I just messaged her and I was like, oh my God, we need to catch up. But really, like, similar things. It's, especially through a transition, it is believing in your head, like the mental switch that you are the leader, you're the boss, you're the manager, you are responsible, and all of those things, and demanding that sort of treatment or sort of recognition as well from everyone else. And it's not recognition like, oh, this is the boss, but recognition in that, to the last point, I think for me, it's interesting when I was having my my sort of listening tours with people when I started, the one thing that I was a bit concerned about was how empathetic I am and how that can sometimes come in the way of, being super firm and assertive and really pushing people hard to achieve or to deliver on their targets. And so that, I would say, from a personality standpoint, is one thing that I've tried to balance, because it is important that you're empathetic. And in the past, like, that has drawn the teams to me and has actually made them more committed to delivering for me or whatever, right? But now I think transcending to this next role, there needs to be some form of like hardness, in a sense. And so that, I would say, is something that's still sort of a work in progress. But that's a development area for me, and hopefully I'm making a bit of progress on that.
take this quickly. I don't know if you can hear me. But yeah, so I think I also have to deal with psychology, right? And I wrote a blog post some time ago saying how we really have to manage our psychology as a CEO. And I think it goes both for men and women. It's not specific to women, although we have additional challenges. I think that definitely we have to find ways, because being a leader, you're always having to choose between bad and worse, constantly making bad choices, but those bad choices are better than the alternative, which was a worse choice. And you will be judged for having to taken a bad, made a bad decision. And so often, people don't really understand that the alternatives were so much worse. And so it's constantly, and it's very lonely being a CEO. It's very lonely. Very few people that really understand what you go through on a daily basis. And critical is this peer-to-peer support of, CEOs talking and, mentoring other CEOs that are peers, not necessarily somebody that has more or less experience. It's just somebody that you can talk to, because your family doesn't understand, your friends don't understand. Only somebody that's really been through it or is going through it has the ability to support you in the way that psychologically you.
Thanks. I mean, I think there's not to be too trite about it, but there's plenty of male leaders who struggle with finding that empathetic voice that Uche described, and scaling back their assertive nature, for present company included. But it's interesting to hear that dynamic exists on the other side of the gender spectrum. I do want to get one more of our participants' questions in, and then I had an exit question. So if we could be a little fast in answering the next two and still remain on time, that would be great. So our participant says, wonderful you returned after education and work abroad. How did you establish or reestablish a local cohort? Did you feel some form of isolation by reason of being away? And please.
Sure, I mean, I'll go first because of time. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it does take, because you sort of spend 4 years in college or more, you do your master's, and then a couple of years if you do end up working in some company in the US or wherever country you're in. Coming back definitely feels weird, and because you're coming back and your friends or people that you left have kind of been together since college and have sort of formed, built their own network. And so I think it's important that people recognize that it's not going to be easy landing day one. You will have to sort of, it's almost like just the same way you have culture shock when you go to the US or you go to the UK. There is what they call reverse culture shock. And part of that is coming and finding that the cohort of people you knew have moved on, and you kind of have to build a whole new network. It might be the same people, but you have to, it's almost like you have to reacquaint yourself with them and catch up with where they are, even as you're sort of doing your own thing. But it does help now that, especially depending on the, when you come back, if you do come back, there's a lot more people that are back from the US or the UK and have kind of been doing, building businesses, etc. So there's a lot more networks that exist right now, and people that are more empathetic to your journey and understand what it means to come back home after having spent time, time abroad. But the last thing I'll say is, if you can, even when you're still abroad, but you're considering to come back home, try and find ways to reconnect, whether it's doing stuff on the continent, then if it's just coming a couple of weeks, a year, just to reconnect, definitely makes it a lot less unfamiliar when you finally do the big move.
You're on mute, Jonathan.
I think we have time for one more response on that if either of you wants to chime in. Otherwise, I'll ask a question.
No, I think the simple thing I'll say is that there are a lot of networks now. So many people have come back to the content. So whether it's social or whether it's something where so many different ways in which you can find a network. And networks work. Once you meet one person, it introduces you to the next person, and the next person, and the next person. And before I said, important that as much as you can engage and maintain those relations remotely.
Great, thank you, Uche. So I did want to ask each of you a question as we wrapped up, and I'll ask you just to give sort of a rapid single fact answer. So what does, if you think, go back to where we started, to the beginning, to your university days, what does a young woman studying in the US need to know that she isn't even thinking about now if she wants to build a career in business in Africa? And I'm sure there's many things. I'll ask you just to think top of mind, one or two things.
So I would say to understand that you know nothing. I remember feeling so smart going back with all my degrees and my success. By the time I opened my office in Cameroon, we already had generated tens of millions of dollars in revenue, had employees in 7 countries. So I really thought I knew it all, and I knew nothing. So we did market studies, and you know, as I often say, I was schooled. So I really learned, you know, through fire, what it's really like. And I think it's very different from theory. Like, it's very different. There's nothing that I can explain that I can say, you know, this is what you should anticipate. What you just should realize is that you know, through in a very humble way, understand that when you're entering any new market, because I would say, you know, Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire are neighbors, but they're so incredibly different in terms of business culture, in terms of the business laws, that, you know, just know that you don't know. That's the suggestion I would give.
Thanks. Bilha and Uche.
So completely echo what Rebecca has said, would say exactly what he said. It's important that you recognize you don't know. But just to add on to that, things will not be given to you on a silver platter. And I think sometimes, especially for the audience of people we're speaking to, you know, you're brilliant, you've gone to these great schools, Ivy League schools, or, you know, the equivalent. And sometimes it's easy to come back thinking, oh, people, you know, will roll out the red carpet for you. That's not going to happen. You will need to prove yourself. You will need to learn. And sometimes you might actually have to prove yourself a lot more than people that have been on the ground a lot longer. So while it's important to have the credentials and they will open certain doors, it's also important to remember that nothing will come to you on a silver platter, and you will need to work for it. Secondly, nothing substitutes experience and the willingness to just get your hands dirty and do the hard work. So again, sometimes people kind of think, oh, I'll come in and people will be excited because I'm this, you know, amazing lady. No, you need to roll up your sleeves and work hard. And I know it sounds very obvious, but it actually isn't. And I find that that's a big difference between successful entrepreneurs and unsuccessful people. It's just who's willing to get into the trenches and get their, you know, roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty.
Yep, that was the thing I was going to say. But I think just adding a little bit to that is really taking every opportunity that gets thrown at you, because that is the single reason why I'm here. I did every role in the company. Like, I was hired as COO, and I was literally on the field, like, with the clerks. I did everything in the company, and so because of that, I wouldn't say that's a single reason, but that's a major reason for why I'm here. So essentially, take every opportunity. It will give you the experience that is required. Here, it's not about it's not theoretical. It is very practical. And so that experience is super, super critical. The other thing I will say that a lot of people that I've seen that have struggled, that move back, is that you have to really adjust your mindset and be ready for challenges. Look at expect them and just be ready to attack them as they come. Because if you don't, you could be overwhelmed. So put on that resilient hat and be ready for challenges to come your way. And all you should be thinking about is, oh, another one. Okay, cool. How are we going to solve this now? But really just have that mindset. Otherwise, it could be sometimes overwhelming. That's what I'd say.
Fantastic. Uche, Rebecca, and Bilha, thank you so much for sharing and for your candor and for your continued leadership. I learned today, and I'll continue to learn from all three of you in the days to come. Thank you everyone for attending and participating in the panel. If you haven't already, please make sure to fill out the survey for this on the right side of your screen. And I'll hand over now to Christine, who will briefly talk about the lunchtime network session. Christine.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much to all of our fantastic speakers, all of you from this morning. I hope that you were feeling as challenged and as inspired as I am. And now we welcome those of you that are joining us at this time. We have capped our registration at 500 individuals logging in from truly all over the world, nearly 40 countries to be exact. And so we'd like to welcome you to an opportunity to network with others in our optional, but hopefully packed lunchtime networking session. As you'll see on the slide, if we could kindly pull that up, you will be able to direct yourselves to the community drop-down in order to access the discussions. The community drop-down at the top of your screens. From there, you will have access to virtual tables to join that are labeled with our 4 themes, and you can also move around in the different tables. Feel free to bring your lunch, snack, or tea, and we'll see you back promptly in 1 hour. With that, we'll see you soon and enjoy connecting with your colleagues and friends. Thank you.